Hey guys, high level hero guides continue as we are closing out of September. We are going to be having a Hanzo guide. Now, Hanzo on Infernal Shrines is generally just kind of a poke bot, but I wanted to show this game because I still think that it's really interesting that you could play him a little bit differently, even if you're supposed to play him in a very specific way. Usually on this map, people just go Q build, and they just go the AoE, and they just steal away objectives while people are fighting over the Infernal Shrines. However, W build in the competitive scene is much more valuable because you have much more damage potential, you can burst much better, and anyone that's near a wall you can pretty much just take out. And so Infrared's going to be going the W build, even though on this map it's much more common to just be going the Q build. Now, I've done a lot of things talking about Hanzo. I've done quite a few builds videos about him over the last few months, but I still think that he's a cool hero to talk about in the competitive scene, and I think everyone can improve at him. Even a lot of these players that are playing Hanzo, they could always improve at Hanzo. So I definitely still want to share this video because I think any of these guides are definitely helpful, and because Hanzo's popular, I feel like it's one that we can definitely work on. So this video, all of my videos in September have had a sponsor. This video's sponsor is Honey again. Honey is just an extension that will look for coupons for you when you purchase stuff. It's completely free. The way they make money is they use kind of an affiliate code. It's kind of a weird way of making money, but they use an affiliate code. So you know they're not really like trying to sell your information or anything. Because they're just kind of abusing a system that's kind of broken with the whole affiliate system for Amazon, but whatever. So they will find a coupon for you, and then they'll make 1% of whatever the sale was, and that's just something that they do. That's one of the features that they have. The feature I generally use more is the tracking of prices, but with all of that being said, we don't really need to hear any more about Honey. Click the description down below if you want a free extension that saves you money while shopping, especially on Amazon. Otherwise, don't worry about it. And let's get into this game. So, early portions of the game on Hanzo is following up your team's abilities and just getting your stacks on simple geometry. That's all you really need to do. Level 4, you'll most likely take explosive arrows because it is still really good even without the quest at level 1. But yeah. Honestly, in the early portions of the game, you're just trying to get your W stacked as fast as possible. Once your W is stacked, you get that 2 additional arrows, and you can start spiking people. What I mean by a spike is oftentimes this used to be called a shotgun effect in games, where if you fire off a bunch of different projectiles, if a bunch of them hit a target, you do a bunch of extra damage. So it was called a shotgun effect for a long time. I like to call them spikes these days because I feel like shotgun effect has just been one of that thing of like, hey, the closer the enemies are, the more damage you do. But I don't know, you call it whatever, it doesn't matter, spike, shotgun effect. But what you do is if someone is near a wall and they get stunned there from a blizzard or whatever, and you fire off a W at the right angle, you 100-0 so many people on the team. So that's going to be the important part about going W build on Hanzo, is if you can get that combo down. If I remember right, the last video I did on Hanzo was auto attack build, so I feel like this should show a little bit of what I wanted you guys to see with W build on Hanzo, because it is the highest potential damage build, I would argue, on almost any hero. Maybe not the highest potential damage, because like a Gul'dan will naturally have like some of the highest potential damages, like E that repeats back and forth over an entire team, but some of the highest both burst and sustain damage on a single hero is what it is. So I think that and I mean also the Q is still really good on this game, but yeah, it's really good. There's also something else I want to talk about this game that's a little different, but I'll get into it right after this objective. So you can see he's focusing on landing his Qs to steal the enemy objective, and his Ws, he's doing his best to just get his stacks. He's not trying to spike anyone right now, he's just trying to get his stacks. And that's pretty much all he's doing, but he is burning out of his mana quickly, and he does have a fountain, but right now getting the fountain isn't as important as just making sure that he stays there with his team for the objective. So the thing that I wanted to talk about is specifically changing roles if you're in a competitive team. A lot of people, they have their main role, but then like they'll have a hero that they're really good at a different role, and they'll adjust to fit they'll change their whole team around just so that they can play that extra role. So let's say, for example, your tank player plays a really good like Orphea. They'll say, oh, well, if we need to play Orphea, I'll play Orphea, and then you tank. And then your mage player now needs to tank, and it kind of screws up the entire draft and forces everyone to go into roles that their mentality doesn't fit. And I tell people, I say, instead of doing that, what you should do instead is you should just have people teach the hero to the people that actually main that role. Because I don't really like people shifting roles a lot. On this team, they have one of the better Hanzo players in North America. In fact, when HGC was around, he had a 65% win rate with Hanzo in top 50 Grandmaster against other pros. And that's their healer, Zine. Zine is or at least was, one of the best Hanzo players in North America while HGC was around. Now, I don't see him playing Hanzo very much anymore, but it is an interesting thing that instead of them swapping to Zine for Hanzo, they just told Infrared, they're like, just practice Hanzo more. And you can tell he's been practicing Hanzo more because he's getting, I mean, he took the majority of that objective on his own. And now his W quest is done. I would argue it's a little later than average, but it's still good enough. So now that explains the early to mid portions of the game. Let me talk about the builds that he's going. Of course, he's going to take Dragon's Arrow. Symbol Geometry, so that you can get the spike damage of hitting one person so many times that they just lose their entire health bar. So he fires off this ult. And I want to talk a little bit about why these ults are fired off. A lot of people wonder when they're playing Hanzo, like, what's a good ult to fire? And it is definitely a good question to ask because it's difficult to know what kind of ult you should be firing. Should you be firing out these where they fire off really far out? What you want to do, and I've mentioned this with almost every CC, normally when I'm talking about tanks, you really, really want to CC targets your team is already attacking or already in range to attack. And this is exactly what happened. He CC'd a target that his team was already in range to attack, and they just needed to follow up that CC. So if your team's already chasing down a target, arrows are really impactful. And this is one thing that Infrared is very good at. And again, this is high-level heroes guides. All of the games that I'm taking are from the competitive scene. These are coordinated teams that are grouped up together. And this is in the Nexus Gaming Series qualifiers. I believe this team is already qualified. And the other team is... I don't believe they've qualified. I know Champ of Horde is a really solid solo laner. So there's a potential. I'm a little unfamiliar. I know. I feel like I know O'Neal, but I'm not really sure. But I don't believe they've qualified yet. But there's still a lot of time left in the qualifiers for Storm Division. So that's how you fire off a good Dragon's Arrows. You try to focus on targets that your team's already attacking or they're in range to set up to attack. Then he just uses his W, uses his Q. Now what some Hanzos will do is they'll fire off their ult and they'll use their trait to join the fight. We don't see that here, but he still is very effective. He makes sure that he gets an auto attack, then a Q, and then an auto attack. It's again very small, but it adds a lot of damage potential. So effectively, if you get an auto attack, a Q, and then an auto attack, you're not wasting the time in between your really long auto attack timers. You're just throwing one thing and then throwing another thing and then throwing another thing, and you're essentially getting the Q off without a cast time if you do it correctly. So all in all, you're getting the 300 damage, the 400 damage, and the 300 damage to do over 1,000 damage in a very short period of time. That's half of a Hanzo's health by just doing that combo, and half of a Hanzo's health in under 2 seconds. And so if you combo that with even landing half of your scatter arrow on the same target, you 100 to 0 just about anyone that gets hit by any sort of CC that your team is bringing out, which is why he's still one of the best heroes in this game if you are just playing him out correctly. But he's very difficult. Again, I put Hanzo in probably the top 3 for skill cap heroes in the game, alongside like Samuro and potentially like Vikings, or like the multi-controlled heroes in the game. There are a lot of other ones like Genji that are definitely high skill cap, but I put their skill cap just a little bit below. I mean, top 5 for sure. I don't really order them too much, because when you get into skill cap, you get into a lot of subjective craziness about the skill cap, so it's kind of hard to break it down that way. Anyways, so he takes a good chunk of his health. He goes, picks up a couple potions. This is an interesting build. I guess it is kind of normal for what's currently being run in North America. Europe's running very different stuff right now. They're running old school stuff, really. It's not that different. So again, he's back to focusing on the objective. He's not worrying about this team fight too much. However, if he does want to help out with the team fight, he can step back to get the larger stun of Dragon's Arrow, and then he can jump over the wall and then get value off of the scatter arrow if he wants to go with that. But most likely he's going to save his arrow to interrupt the mosh pit. So you see mosh going off, the interrupt happens immediately, and then he gets that combo that I was talking about, that auto Q auto. Now it doesn't really do a lot to this ETC. He must have had armor or something, because he does land the auto Q auto, but ETC was still sitting at essentially full health by the end of that. So now he's just doing his best to poke from range and play safe. This is something that's, again, there's a lot of pauses going on in this game. Playing safe is something that is, I mean, it can never be stated enough. This has been a key factor in the last few videos, that just playing safe and waiting for the right moments is how these teams have been able to close out these games. And that's exactly what he's doing again. He's just playing safe. He's getting damage off. He's hitting the Punisher, trying not to lose too much from it. Now on the other side, there's a bit of a fight going down here. Urel's just annoying people, as Urel does. And then they grabbed a camp. That's all they got with the kill. I wish these teams would learn a little bit more from the Korean teams and play more aggressive when they get kills, when they get objectives, anything like that. But overall, it's overall, I mean, they're still definitely getting these camps. I just feel like camps this late in the game are not really that worth it. Anyways, let's talk about the mid game. When you start reaching the mid game on Hanzo, you've already completed your W quest. So you don't need to be worrying about that. The mid game is all going to be about that combo that I mentioned. The W to try to spike someone right up against the wall. The auto attack, Q auto attack, and setting up with the ults on the ones that you can. You want to use your trait to try to rejoin the fight after throwing out an ult. But you also don't really want to waste your trait too much. Ninja Assassin's used so that you can get a reset on your trait, so you can fire off your ult, use your trait, finish off the target that got stunned, and then you get your trait back so you can still use it as an escape, which is pretty much the meta talent if you're trying to run this playstyle. But in order to run this playstyle, you definitely are going to need to practice. I'm surprised at how many of these replays I've done that people are using the banned mounts, or the train. If I remember right, that's still banned in NGS and in Heroes Lounge, but it doesn't really matter. If you're curious on why it's banned, there's just a few bugs that you can abuse, and whether or not they abuse those bugs, it's better to just say, hey, don't use this. So you see the combo go out right there, except for the W doesn't actually get any of the damage, and he doesn't use the trait to jump over. So was really limited, but that was actually just a really good engage by the enemy team to make sure that they could go onto that Mei. And was a 5v4 because the Urel was still double soaking during this time. Now, the Korean teams would just take a fort with what they just got with that kill. North America teams are, again, going back for camps again. I know I'm really harsh for against North American teams and even sometimes Europe teams, but watching these Korean teams dominate makes me really wish some of the other teams were watching this and adapting to it, because there's so much time wasted on camps that it's not even funny anymore. Like, it's just one of those things that it's like, I'm just so annoyed at seeing how much time is wasted on camps. Just camps are just so wasted, but whatever. Doesn't really matter. It's just something that I notice. Level 16 piercing arrow. This is when it gets a lot easier to play Hanzo, because instead of the spike normally has to go like this, right? Let's say that the enemy hero is here. That means that your position, you have to be able to spike right at this little edge. But if the hitbox is too big on the hero that you're hitting, your W is just going to hit this target and not get any value. However, what you can do instead is, once you get piercing arrow, even if their hitbox is big, it'll pierce through their hitbox and hit them anyways. And then all of these extra arrows that are being fired off are also going to be piercing and hitting everyone over here. So suddenly, with piercing arrows, W build gets so much easier. And not just that, let's say the enemy gets stunned right here. You can stand right here and you can fire off it. It'll go right through them, and then it will pierce and it'll bounce and fire off all of the arrows. And this right here is the easiest kill of your life if you can pay attention and position correctly. If someone is stunned at a wall and you can position like this, you throw a W, an auto attack, a Q, an auto attack, and you kill any hero in the game. It's that easy. So level 16 is where I hope Infrared will take this and adjust. Now, I haven't seen this game ahead of time. This one, I'm teaching you guys what you should be doing on Hanzo, and I'm hoping that he does the correct things. Most of the other games I'd seen previously, with the exception of possibly the last two. So again, he sees his team all already in range. He fires off the arrow. He gets a kill, gets a reset on his trait, and he gets a kill. So the arrow set up the engage. Did he get the perfect W or the perfect Q auto Q? Not necessarily. He's missed most of his Ws. His Q auto Qs haven't had that much value. But his arrow that he fired off was the game-changing thing for this. So if I was Infrared, I would definitely want to practice my combos more. I would want to memorize angles. I've mentioned this in the other Hanzo video, but I like people to use the technique used in basketball. The technique used in basketball is, I'll give like a down angle of it, but let's say that this is the hoop, right? The little hoops right here. And let's say that this is the court. I'll just go with like an orange, right? There's an angle that is really common that people like to shoot from, and that's from about this angle, because you can hit the backboard of the hoop right about here, and then it will bounce in, and they can get it almost every single time if they do this. They memorize that angle. It's not even memorizing, it's muscle memory. Their body does this without them needing to think about it. As long as they can make their way into this particular spot, they can always land that shot. And the same thing over on the other side. So people end up playing around everyone's spots, and they will make sure that they're passing to someone right before they get to that spot. That's the strategy in basketball, but the same thing's true with Hanzo. If you can memorize and turn these into muscle memory, the position that you're in and the position that the enemy's in, then you don't need to think about your W, and it automatically fires and always gets the full spike damage off. You won't have a lot of those times where you fire off a W and it hits this and it either goes this way or it goes this way, because you have you're always going to be in a position where you can always bounce off of this because you're going to set yourself in a spot that you always get value. And that's something that every Hanzo player needs to improve. Even the Hanzo players that were in HGC needed to improve this. Where a lot of them got away with it. Crowan, when Crowan played Hanzo, he just fired off a lot of W's and got a ton of value off of it. When Psalm played Hanzo, Psalm waited and positioned a little bit more to land the perfect W's, but he also had the benefit of playing Hanzo when Hanzo had just a little bit of extra attack range. So it's kind of cheating to use Psalm as the example when it comes to that, just because he was an amazing Hanzo player, but he also didn't have to worry about the lower range. Crowan had to worry about the lower range on Hanzo, and he still, just dominated with it. So with all of that being said, use basketball, use sports, use drills to learn these things, because Infrared is throwing game-changing arrows out all the time, but the game-changing arrows aren't going to be enough when you start going against teams that have game-changing ults themselves, right? So that's something that he's definitely going to need to worry about when because their team is already qualified, but it's something that they're going to need to worry about when they start going against some of these other qualified teams, because it will get pretty rough. These ults are not going to be enough, especially when they're playing against the team we just watched 2 days ago with that what's her name, the white main, because she's just going to ult right before he lands his ult. They're going to survive everything, and now he doesn't have that consistent damage that he needs. So they can't rely on these ults alone. But in Storm League, you could certainly try to rely on these ults alone because, again, another pause. Really interesting. It's the ETC that's getting DC'd. Either way, you guys can learn from these arrows. These arrows will significantly increase your ability in Storm League. Now, I often get asked about Dragon Strike, if you should use this in Storm League. I would say if you have Entomb and you can guarantee that they're in it for a good portion of time, I would say it might be worth it. But outside of that, I wouldn't take it. I would just go Dragon Arrow. Or maybe on a map like Tomb of the Spider Queen, where there's a lot of really tight spaces and tight corridors that you could get some value out of, but I really wouldn't worry about it. Just go Dragon's Arrow. It's a lot of damage, it's a huge stun, and if you use that in combination with your trait, you can get a lot from it. So right here, he fires off an ult. He uses his trait first, which is a little surprising. Generally, you'll use your ult and then you'll trait. But in this case, he does get the reset on his trait from that kill, and he's able to quickly get a second kill. So again, his ults are really, really good. What he needs to work on is his W's. That was a pretty good W, and he still has his trait to get by. That was quick. He didn't have to think about it. So there are some W's he has good, but I think every Hanzo can work on W's. Either way, they end up taking this from this one death, and they end up closing out this game. So, to explain the late game portion of Hanzo, it is abusing piercing arrows as well as landing great ults. You can go bullseye to extend the stun duration of your ult. While you can play the game for a global, a lot of people use bullseye because you can stun with Dragon's Arrow and then follow up with bullseye, so you can turn the 2-second stun into a 3-second stun. And a lot of people take this just to be a secondary mosh interrupt, so you don't need to use your ult to interrupt to mosh. But sometimes people will take this just as a follow-up to different CC. But play of the game is also a very good ultimate to take as well. Hopefully this gives you guys an idea of how you should be playing Hanzo and how to approach these games. And I just want to say thank you guys all for watching. Feel free to check out my other videos, and I appreciate everyone that's stayed this entire time in September, at least gone back and watched some of the other videos in September. There should be one more video in September to close out the month, for one video every other day in the month. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me. Feel free to check out my other videos.